Resident Evil 9 Theory Time. Damn, that actually has a nice ring to it. I might have to trademark. I'm actually trademarking it right now as we speak. So if you hear anyone say the phrase Resident Evil 9 Theory Time, they have to pay me $5 million. But to move to the actual theory that I came across today, actually on Reddit, on Resident Evil 9 prediction thread, in a comment posted by Domination1799, where this user explains their prediction and they mentioned the name Brandon Bailey. If that name does not ring a bell, you might want to educate yourself on the lore if you want to call yourself a real evil head, a real biohazarder if you will. I'm just joking, that name did not ring any bells to me either. And me obviously being the greatest Resident Evil content creator, I think I can pardon you for not knowing who Brandon Bailey is. That's why I am here to tell you. Brandon Bailey in college was a student of James Marcus. James Marcus, obviously the creator of the T-Virus, his research was stolen by Wesker and Birkin in that one cutscene in Resident Evil 0, a big part of Resident Evil 0. In 1966, Bailey set out with Marcus and Spencer on a private expedition to West Africa, where they were looking for the Stairway of the Sun, which is the flower we can see in Resident Evil 5 in the Garden of the Sun, in that one, section where Chris and Sheva arrived there. And as the lore of Resident Evil 5 reveals, this is the flower that hosts the progenitor virus. And this, of course, is all well and interesting. It's definitely a topic for another theory for another day, but Resident Evil 5 is actually where Brandon Bailey is a prominent character. Kind of. Not really, actually. While Brandon Bailey does not appear in any Resident Evil physically, in Resident Evil 5 he's mentioned a lot of times in the files, and even his own journal can be found. Not much about Bailey's character can be extracted from these journals, other than him displaying the same sociopathic tendencies as like Spencer and Marcus and the rest of the scientists, as he displays no concern about like the native population of the region where they are conducting this research. Throughout his journal, he also calls Spencer Mr. Spencer, which reminds me a lot of Todd from Breaking Bad when he called Walter Mr. White like constantly, in like this very polite manner. And Todd is like the most obvious and very realistic portrayal of a psychopath in fiction ever. Throughout his journal, he also shows great respect for Marcus. He always refers to him as Dr. Marcus. However, in West Africa, Bailey spent his time as the chief of research alone. This was actually a ploy by Spencer to separate those two so he can cement himself as the head of the company. On one hand, Bailey was glad that Marcus was not there because the place was far from being an ideal place for research and scientific study. On the other hand, it was obvious that Bailey was in over his head, as despite the facility where he was supposed to work was already completed, he demanded an expansion. He continued working in Africa and stayed in touch with Marcus, but eventually came to find out that Marcus has died, which made Bailey spiral down into depression. And when they closed down the research center in 1998, when Raccoon City and the Arcline Mountain incident happened, he barely cared. And that was pretty much the last mention of Bailey in Resident Evil 5. He wasted his life away and was pretty bummed up about it, he was pretty depressed. And that would be the end of it. He packed up and went home. However, that was not the end. Bailey was actually responsible for the creation of the connections. And we know this because his name is mentioned as late as in Resident Evil Village. And again, the Connections is of course an international organization focused on the research of bioweapons and then selling them to other people and organizations and terrorists. And what makes Bailey and the Connections so relevant in today's direction of Resident Evil, how the story has been going for the past few games, meaning Resident Evil 7 and Village, is that they were actually responsible for the creation of Evelyn. And obviously Evelyn was created as means for Mother Miranda to resurrect her daughter Ava, which subsequently ties the connections to Resident Evil Village, even though their involvement there is not as prominent as it was in Resident Evil 7. At the end of the day, they are the ones moving, in the background. They are the ones who not only employed Lucas Baker, but they also informed Mother Miranda of Rose's existence. So this effectively makes the organization, meaning the connections, not the organization, which was another organization in Resident Evil universe, the main villain of Resident Evil 7 and Village. Despite them not being actually talked about by the characters, they're only really mentioned in the files. So I do believe in a way to tie, the trilogy Resident Evil 7, 8 and now 9 together. The connections are going to play a role in this game, with Bailey maybe finally being in the focus. As we can see the old guy sitting on the chair in the trailer in a very Spencer-like manner. I think it's not far-fetched to say that this might be Bailey, because Bailey is connected to all of the founders of Umbrella, so to depict him in such a state. Furthermore, because of Bailey's connection to Marcus specifically, I think it is also possible that the main enemies of the game might be similar to the leech creatures from Resident Evil 0. And I would even go as far as to say, if you remember Resident Evil 0, the Queen Leech, when Marcus died, it consumed his brain and started to believe itself to be Marcus himself. I've been saying it for months now. Cloning will be a huge part of Resident Evil 9. It already has been in Resident Evil 8 with what seems to be a Chris bioweapon. I cannot stress enough that you should keep the final scene of Village in mind when it comes to Resident Evil 9. And because Marcus worked on biotechnology that can effectively clone a person as it did it with himself. I mean, hell, the caped figure, the one that we keep seeing throughout the trailers, I think it would be safe to assume that this might also be like a leech creature like those we saw in Resident Evil 0. They're not all the same design-wise, but I think you can pinpoint some similarities. What's I think even crazier to say, these leeches are called Mimicry Marcus. Because the Queen Leech assumed the role of Marcus, I assume the minions also assumed the, aesthetics, like the general aesthetics of its master, so they were made to look like Marcus, they were made to mimic Marcus. That's why they are called Mimicry Marcus. So could this masked figure actually be just another Mimicry Marcus? Because Bailey, had, this close relationship with Marcus. He fell into depression after his death. I would almost maybe even say that he is gay for him, as in homosexual.
Mr. White's gay for...
And after finding out what actually happened with Marcus, that there are these leeches that, kind of resemble him, although not really, but they are his work. But Bailey decided to continue this work and, just keep a Mimicry Marcus as a reminder of, his mentor, while obviously experimenting on him and enhancing him even further, successfully transforming him into a capable lackey. And I know what you're thinking right now, this man is a complete genius. He figured out the entire plot just from the 2 trailers months before the game comes out. I'm going to like and subscribe right now. Capcom executives, if they are watching right now, they're tearing their hair out because I just spoiled the entire game that I haven't even released yet. And I didn't even need some fake ass pseudo leakers. But let me tell you something, that's not all. Yes, there's actually more evidence to this. We know Elisa from Resident Evil Outbreak is in the game, so it has also this Outbreak connection. And what if I told you the leeches also made an appearance in Outbreak? And sure, at first glance the giant leech box has nothing to do with the leeches Marcus was working with. But it is something to keep in mind. So do not forget that there is a connection to Outbreak 2. There has to be. After all, the guy is hunting Elisa for a reason. We don't know why yet, but he is. We can see it in the trailer. I'm not sure if this theory about Bailey is prominent. I'm sure that there are more people thinking about it, because the commenter on Reddit, as I mentioned, he mentioned it very casually, like in between sentences, you know. So I'm assuming this is a well-known theory that he's coming back. I've seen a few comments about it even after I discovered the first comment, but I guarantee you nobody has looked into it as deeply as I have. I'm sure there is a lot more to it. There are going to be some plot twists with it. Maybe that, Grace is also somehow connected to the leeches through Elisa or something. Grace might still be a clone. This is something I came up with earlier in my earlier videos, and something I stand by. And I'm fairly certain that nobody, has talked about it who would be as genius as I am, who would, make the connections. Haha, get it? Because connections, nobody is also as funny as me who talked about it. Which is why, if you want to be a part of the nation of smart people, you are going to like and subscribe. And I know you are smart, because you made it this far. I already see it in you. Genius people, they are naturally drawn to each other. So you, to become a proud member of the Genius Nation, you should like and subscribe, just to make it official. And I wouldn't be telling you this if I thought you're a moron, because I do not want morons here. I would tell them to, go away. But I know you're smart, because you made it this far. Anyway, thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Let me know your theories down in the comments, and hopefully I will see you next time. The S stands for genius out.